Leila Okafor pressed her palm to the ancient oak banister at the foot of Ashcombe Hall's sweeping staircase, letting her fingers rest on the polished wood as if she could read the secrets of this old house by touch alone. The grain was smooth, warm with sunlight, but she felt something deeper beneath, a pulse, a kind of memory left by centuries of hands, a silent promise that this place would endure. She stood for a moment, letting that history settle into her bones, before drawing a steady breath. She had made her choice. She was here to save this estate, whatever it took. Ashcombe Hall rose from the North Yorkshire hills like a ship beached by time, its stone walls streaked by generations of wind and rain. At the far end of the great entrance hall, leaded glass filtered the morning into coloured ribbons across the tiles, casting blues and reds onto the marble busts of vanished Pembrokes. It was beautiful. It was battered. It was nearly lost. She could feel eyes on her. Gareth Pembroke, the new Viscount, stood rigidly beside the fire, a bundle of nerves barely hidden beneath a crisp navy jacket, and the stern set of his jaw. He was in his late 40s, but looked older in the morning light, the silver at his temples matching the glint of old family silver in the hall. There was a haunted pride to him, a man carrying a name heavier than his own life. Their eyes met, and for an instant, Leila glimpsed the panic that kept him up at night, the fear that his family would be the ones to let Ashcombe Hall slip away forever. Sarah Ellison, the estate manager, moved through the house with the quiet assurance of someone who knew every loose floorboard and hidden alcove. She handed Leila a folder, keys jingling at her belt, and gave a nod, practical, sharp, almost daring Leila to impress her. There was a respect to be earned here, not given freely. Vicar Alice Morton arrived a few minutes later, her sensible shoes echoing on the flagstones, her presence calm and unshakable. She smiled as she greeted Leila, her handshake warm, her gaze steady, the sort that had comforted 1,000 grieving parishioners. She introduced herself not as a priest, but as a neighbor, a bridge between the ancient hall and the living village. The contract lay on the table. Leila's hands were steady as she picked up the pen, even as her heart beat faster. She read each line, aware that every signature would tie her to the fate of this crumbling masterpiece, and to the tangled histories of everyone in the room. She signed. There was no turning back now. As they gathered for tea in the library, Gareth tried to project calm, but his voice betrayed him, too formal, too clipped, words spilling out like he was afraid of what would happen if he stopped talking. He spoke of the hall's long lineage, of the storm that had torn slates from the roof, of the foundation cracks and the way the trust fund was shrinking by the week. He admitted, almost under his breath, that the Pembroke family was drowning in debt, but still he clung to pride. He would not let Ashcombe Hall be sold off for parts, not while there was breath in him. It was then that the topic shifted, almost by accident, to Sir Alistair Wynn, the philanthropist with a reputation built on grand gestures and glossy magazine covers, the man who had offered an emergency grant if the family agreed to sell a section of the woodland bordering the estate. The sum was enormous, enough to stabilize the finances overnight. But the price was steep. To give up the land was to give up the soul of Ashcombe Hall, to let the trees fall for some logistics development, to trade heritage for convenience. Leila listened, studying Gareth's face, sensing the war within him. Sarah's jaw clenched. Vicar Alice, quietly pouring more tea, said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. Outside, the sound of hooves drifted through the open window. Midnight, the retired racehorse, was being led through the paddock, his dark coat glossy in the sunlight. Leila watched him for a moment, feeling the steadying presence of the animal. It was strange how much comfort a horse could bring, how easily a moment spent in his company could wash away the doubts and pressures of human affairs. She made a mental note to visit him after the meeting. A knock echoed from the front doors, sharp and insistent. Sarah excused herself, and moments later, returned with a tall, broad-shouldered man in a police uniform. Detective Inspector Colin Mercer entered the room with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to power. He smiled politely, but Leila saw the calculation behind his eyes. He claimed his visit was just a courtesy call, something about community safety now that restoration work was beginning, but his questions were far too pointed. He inquired about the precise plans for structural modifications, the security protocols for rare objects, the digital records of the architectural surveys, matters far beyond his remit. There was something off in his manner, a sense that he wasn't just gathering information, but watching, weighing, looking for weaknesses. Leila met his gaze, feeling the tension rise, but she kept her answers careful and professional. Mercer's eyes lingered a moment too long on the blueprints, spread across the table, before he finally excused himself. As he left, Sarah exchanged a look with Gareth, a flicker of warning, the silent recognition of a threat. They had all heard rumors of Mercer's methods, his allegiance to powerful men like Wynn, his willingness to bend the rules for the right price. When the door closed, the air in the library seemed to thaw a little. Gareth let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. Alice offered reassurance, but Leila could see the anxiety in the room, the sense that they were being watched, manipulated, drawn into a game whose rules were written elsewhere. Late that afternoon, Leila wandered the estate grounds alone, the contract now locked away, her future bound to Ashcombe Hall. She trailed her fingers along the crumbling stone walls, listened to the calls of distant birds in the woods Wynn wanted to claim, and felt a deep resolve forming in her chest. The estate was a patchwork of time, Tudor beams, Victorian windows, wildflower meadows, and whispers of old secrets in every shadow. As the sun dipped low, she found herself by the paddock fence. Midnight approached, ears pricked, breath steaming in the chill air. She stroked his neck, letting her worries settle. In that silent moment, she made a private vow, not just to restore Ashcombe Hall, but to fight for it, for everyone who called it home, and for the future that could still be shaped. Somewhere behind her, the hall stood solid and waiting, both fortress and burden. Ahead, the path was uncertain, but Leila felt ready to face whatever darkness might be waiting in the woods. The following morning dawned cool and grey, mist curling around the old stone pillars at Ashcombe Hall's front gate, giving the entire estate an air of quiet anticipation. Leila Okafor stood at the window of her temporary quarters, watching as her young intern, Amari Price, loaded equipment into the trunk of the battered estate car. Amari, 19 and bursting with energy, seemed eager to begin the day's work, his fingers moving quickly over the case containing the ground-penetrating radar. The machine would help them map the hall's ancient subfloors, searching for voids, old pipes, or secrets the building still kept hidden. Leila sipped her coffee, reviewing the survey plans one more time, before heading downstairs. The house was already humming with activity. Sarah was shouting instructions to the maintenance staff, her clipboard tucked under one arm, while Gareth Pembroke lingered by the foyer, his gaze drifting anxiously toward the accounts ledger on the hall table. Even midnight, the old racehorse, seemed restless in his paddock, snorting and stamping at the frosty air. After a quick briefing, Amari set out in the car, bound for the southern edge of the estate, where the woodland thinned and ancient brambles choked the stone fence line. Leila watched the car disappear down the drive, her mind already shifting to the long list of structural issues that needed attention: cracked lintels in the east wing, water stains in the great hall ceiling, foundation shifts threatening the library. Yet as she sat at the table with her notes, a strange anxiety gnawed at her, a sense of unease that didn't fit the morning's routine. Her phone buzzed. The message was brief: panicked, stopped by police. Guy Mercer. Claims routine. Asking about equipment. Please come, Amari. Leila's chest tightened. She grabbed her jacket and hurried outside, her boots crunching over gravel as she made for the main road. Sarah, sensing trouble, offered to drive her out. Together they followed the winding drive until they reached the boundary gate, where Amari's car was pulled over and D.I. Colin Mercer's squad car idled just ahead, lights winking in the dull light. Mercer was standing with his arms folded, an expression of mock casualness on his face, while a second officer rummaged through the trunk of Amari's car. Amari, usually so unflappable, stood stiff by the roadside, his jaw clenched, eyes darting from the officer's hands to Mercer's cold, appraising stare. Leila forced her voice to remain calm as she approached. Mercer turned, offering his trademark smile, but the message in his eyes was unmistakable. This was his territory, and she was trespassing on it. He asked questions, too many questions, about the technical equipment, the nature of their work, the specifics of their survey. His tone was deliberately ambiguous, hanging between official concern and barely veiled suspicion. Amari stammered out answers, explaining the purpose of the ground radar, the legal basis for their work, but Mercer only pressed harder, leafing through paperwork, checking serial numbers, jotting notes on his pad. He insisted the stop was routine, standard procedure with so much new activity on the estate, but Leila knew better. She could feel the weight of his authority pressing down, a silent threat veiled as concern. Vicar Alice Morton appeared unexpectedly, pulling up in her own dusty hatchback. She stepped out with a brisk efficiency, her clerical collar peeking out beneath her coat, her manner unflustered. She greeted Mercer politely, but her presence seemed to throw him off balance. Calmly, Alice announced that she had witnessed the stop from the churchyard, that she was there to observe and record the process, and that Amari and Leila were acting entirely within their legal rights. Mercer's smile thinned, but he backed off, waving his officers away with a perfunctory warning about security standards before striding back to his car. The moment he was gone, Amari's shoulders slumped. He looked at Leila, eyes glistening with a mixture of relief and embarrassment. "I was scared," he muttered, almost too quietly to hear, even though I knew I'd done nothing wrong. Leila placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did everything right," she said softly, keeping her voice even, calm, steady. "The law is on our side, no matter how it feels right now." They drove back to the hall in silence. Amari stared out the window, his fingers fidgeting nervously with his phone. Leila's mind spun with worry, not just for Amari, but for what this routine stop really meant. It was a warning, a demonstration of power, a reminder that the forces lined up against them could bend the rules whenever it suited them. Later that day, while reviewing the footage from Amari's dashcam, Leila noticed something odd, a new camera, perched on a lamppost near the estate gate, aimed directly at the drive. The unit was boxy, high-tech, and out of place among the battered rural infrastructure. Curious, Amari dove into research mode, running a quick OSINT check. The results made Leila's blood run cold. The automatic number plate recognition, ANPR, camera hadn't been registered with the county. It was owned and installed by a private security firm, the same firm with close ties to Sir Alistair Wynn. The implications were immediate and sinister. Wynn's people weren't just making generous offers and friendly visits, they were monitoring everyone coming and going from Ashcombe Hall, building a database of faces and license plates, watching for vulnerabilities and opportunities. That evening, as the sky darkened and cold rain swept across the moors, Gareth called a meeting in the old kitchen. He apologized to Amari, his face drawn with guilt, admitting that he'd underestimated how far Wynn and his allies would go to unsettle them. "You shouldn't have to put up with this," Gareth said quietly, the words heavy with shame. "None of us should." Sarah, ever practical, suggested reporting the camera to the council, but Leila shook her head. "It's not about the camera," she said, her voice low. "It's about intimidation, about showing us how easily they can get inside our lives. We'll need more than complaints to fight this." Vicar Alice nodded, her gaze steely. "You have allies here. And the community is watching. Don't let them make you afraid. Night fell heavy over Ashcombe Hall, but Leila lingered by the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. Somewhere out beyond the gate, Mercer's officers patrolled the lanes, Wynn's cameras blinked silently, and the pressure mounted. Yet even as anxiety pressed in, Leila found resolve. She would not back down. The fight had only just begun. The morning after the stop and search, Ashcombe Hall was restless. Rain beat gently against the leaded windows, a steady tattoo that seemed to echo the unease of the household. Leila Okafor spent the early hours pacing the library, eyes fixed on a map of the estate's infrastructure drawn in fading brown ink, her mind racing with questions about the threats circling closer with every day. She knew it was time to move from merely reacting to taking action, to use every ounce of knowledge and history within these walls as both shield and sword. Sarah Ellison, always attuned to the house's moods, found Leila by the window, tracing her finger along the pane, lost in thought. Without a word, Sarah motioned for Leila to follow her. They moved swiftly through the chilly corridor, the hum of the modern world receding as the thick stone walls closed around them. Sarah stopped by an old oak door half hidden behind a faded tapestry. She fished a brass key from her pocket, unlocked the door, and beckoned Leila down a flight of narrow, spiraling stairs that creaked underfoot. The cellar was colder, the air tinged with earth and something older, a scent of secrets and preservation. The darkness was broken only by Sarah's flashlight, its beam slicing through dust motes, illuminating brick arches and ancient barrels. "There's something you should see," Sarah murmured, her voice soft but sure. "If we're going to protect Ashcombe, we need to know every inch of it." At the far end, behind racks of forgotten wine bottles, Sarah stopped at a section of wall that seemed unremarkable at first glance. She ran her hands along the mortar until she found a hidden notch, then pressed. With a gentle click, a panel swung inward, revealing a cramped space barely large enough for a grown person to crouch. The air within was colder, older, a priest hole, carved into the stone centuries before, when the threat of religious persecution made hiding places essential for survival. Leila crouched, her knees brushing the flagstones. She ran her hand across the oak beam sealing the priest hole, a perfect match to the Tudor banister upstairs. There was a silent, reverent connection in that moment, a realization that those who built this place had always intended it to endure, no matter the storm. She felt the weight of history, and the weight of her own responsibilities, settling deeper on her shoulders. Sarah's flashlight flickered over a second feature, an old iron ring set into the floorboards near the back of the space. She gripped it, heaved, and revealed a round, heavy hatch set into the ground, a lid of solid oak, scored with centuries of scratches. Beneath, there was a faint echo of moisture, the whisper of a draught. "That's the old well," Sarah explained. "Sealed for decades, but it runs under most of the hall. Some say it connects to forgotten tunnels." There was a thrill in her voice, a glimmer of pride for the estate's mysteries. Propped against the wall, half hidden beneath a leather-bound ledger, was a roll of yellowed blueprints. Leila unrolled them carefully, holding her breath. They were technical diagrams, hand-inked by an architect long dead, drawings of the estate's foundations, ancient drainage systems, and, most importantly, the web of underground spaces. There were annotations in tight script, references to hatches, access points and concealed rooms. It was a treasure map, drawn not for gold but for survival. As they studied the plans, Sarah's voice grew more reflective. She confessed that after Gareth's career imploded years before, when a legal scandal nearly ruined the Pembrokes, she had found him here, in the dark, seeking solace in the silence beneath the hall. She had saved him then, drawn him back to purpose. Now, she seemed to be offering Leila the same quiet trust, the same chance to become part of the hall's living legacy. Leila's hands trembled as she traced the lines of the map. She realized, suddenly, that the greatest tool they possessed wasn't money or influence, but the very history of Ashcombe itself. Every secret chamber, every ancient hatch, every hidden room could be a shield against the forces pressing in from outside. She felt hope rising, fragile but real, as she envisioned using these secrets to outmaneuver Mercer and Wynn. While Leila and Sarah were still deep in the cellar, a sharp clatter echoed from the other side of the wall. Sarah stepped back, pushing aside a loose stone. There, behind a second false panel, was a small metal safe, almost invisible against the blackened brick. Sarah's hands moved deftly, entering the code, and the safe door creaked open to reveal a thin bundle of papers, some curled with age, others newer, threatening letters, invoices, cryptic notes. The topmost envelope bore a faded postmark and was addressed to Gareth's father. In a trembling hand at the bottom was a single signature. A.W. Leila felt a chill creep up her spine. She pulled the letter free and scanned its contents. The words were menacing, promising ruin if the Pembrokes ever stood in the way of a certain development. The letter was dated 1997, but the threat was timeless. Beneath the letter, more documents detailed shadowy transactions, land, bribes, hush money exchanged between the Pembrokes' rivals and various local officials. Sarah met Leila's eyes. "Wynn's family has circled this place for decades," she said softly. "Now we have proof, not just stories, not just rumors." Climbing back into the main house, Leila felt a new resolve surging in her chest. She had always believed in the power of history, but now history had gifted her both a weapon and a shield. The ancient oak, the priest hole, the forgotten tunnels, all tools in a battle that was growing fiercer by the day. Above them, the hall stood silent, but not unguarded. They had the blueprints, the map, the ledger of threats, a counterweight to Wynn's money and Mercer's intimidation. Evening descended over Ashcombe Hall as Leila made her way to Midnight's stable. She paused, resting her hand on the horse's broad neck, feeling the solid reassurance of his presence. For a moment, the burdens of the day lifted. In the quiet of the stable, she made another silent vow: no matter what shadows gathered, she would not let this house fall. The hall's secrets were now hers to wield, and the fight for its future had only just begun. The days had begun to blur at Ashcombe Hall, anxiety threading its way through every routine, every conversation, every careful step along the creaking floorboards. Leila felt it most in the early evenings, when dusk gathered in the gardens and the hall seemed to hold its breath, anticipating trouble. She had spent most of that day cataloguing the hidden rooms and passageways with Sarah, reviewing the blueprints and diagrams by the soft yellow glow of a desk lamp, their discoveries forming a map of both danger and hope. Yet even as she marked secret doors and possible escape routes, her mind remained restless, haunted by the letter signed A.W., its threat echoing through the silence of the old house. By sunset, a cold wind swept in from the moors, rattling window panes and sending loose leaves skittering across the flagstones. Sarah busied herself in the kitchen, Gareth lingered by the fire with a drink, and Leila, feeling a mounting unease, decided to check on Midnight. The stable was a haven at the edge of the estate, its wooden beams older than many of the trees that surrounded it, the smell of hay and horses a comforting balm against the day's relentless tension. Midnight greeted her with a soft nicker, his dark eyes shining with intelligence. She stroked his nose, whispering gentle words, feeling her heartbeat slow, her mind clear. For a few minutes, she brushed the old racehorse, humming softly, losing herself in the rhythmic movement, and the subtle strength beneath her hands. The calm was shattered by the acrid scent of gasoline, a thin, sharp thread that didn't belong. Leila froze. From the far end of the stable, just beyond the tack room, came the faintest crackle, followed by a flicker of unnatural light at the edge of her vision. She spun, heart thudding, and saw flames licking at a pile of straw bales, already sending up choking black smoke. Panic erupted. Midnight reared, his eyes wild, hooves striking at the stall gate. Leila's hands trembled as she fumbled for the latch, coughing as the smoke thickened. She forced the gate open, grabbing the lead rope, voice ragged as she tried to soothe the terrified animal. The stable's old wood seemed to catch at once, the heat building with frightening speed. Leila knew she had seconds, no more, to get them both out. In that frantic moment, Sarah burst through the main door, keys jangling at her belt, her face set in grim determination. She reached for the emergency extinguisher, dousing the flames at the tack room door while Leila coaxed Midnight out into the night. Gareth, drawn by the noise, sprinted across the lawn, jacket flapping in the wind. He didn't hesitate, he dropped to his knees in the mud, arms thrown around Midnight's neck, holding the shaking horse as if to ground both of them in the chaos. For a few desperate minutes, it was all action, Sarah battling the fire, Leila leading Midnight in frantic circles, Gareth whispering words of comfort through clenched teeth, the three of them working together in wordless coordination. Smoke billowed across the courtyard, the air thick with fear and adrenaline. When the last of the flames were doused, silence fell, broken only by Midnight's heaving breaths and the distant wail of a siren approaching from the village. Gareth's face was streaked with ash, tears glinting in his eyes as he pressed his forehead to the horse's mane. All pretense of aristocratic reserve was gone, in that raw, muddy embrace. He was simply a man terrified of loss, of losing the last connection to his family's past, of letting the hall fall to ruin or violence. Leila's own eyes stung, her hands shaking not just from smoke but from anger. The attack had been deliberate, she could see the shattered glass of a bottle near the door, the oily residue of accelerant soaking into the earth. Someone wanted to send a message, to remind them how vulnerable they really were. By the time D.I. Mercer arrived, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by exhaustion and a simmering fury. Mercer surveyed the scene with professional detachment, taking notes, his face unreadable. But Leila saw the flicker of something else, a calculation, perhaps even satisfaction, as he examined the evidence. His questions were perfunctory, almost bored. He promised to look into it, to review the CCTV, but there was no urgency, no real concern. Sarah watched him with narrowed eyes, her own trust eroded further. "That man's not here to help us," she muttered once Mercer had left. "He's here to keep us scared." Later that night, as they gathered in the kitchen to regroup, Amari appeared with his laptop, face pale but triumphant. "I pulled the metadata from the CCTV server," he announced, sliding the device across the table. "There's a phone that pinged the cell tower near the stable just before the fire. The email matches an employee from Wynn's security firm. It's in the logs." Leila felt a spark of hope, faint but real. Proof, something concrete to push back against the smothering influence closing in around them. She looked at Amari, pride and gratitude mingling with her exhaustion. "Good work," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "We use this? We have to?" Gareth, still muddy and shaken, managed a weak smile. "For once, we have more than rumors. We have something they can't ignore." That night, as the hall settled into uneasy sleep, Leila stood by Midnight's stall, watching the horse doze, safe for now. She reached out, resting her hand on his neck, feeling the slow, steady beat of his heart. In the darkness, with the scent of smoke still lingering, she made another vow, not just to protect the hall, but to fight back, to turn fear into resolve, and to remind those who threatened them that Ashcombe's strength was more than just stone and wood. It was memory, loyalty, and the fierce will to endure. Ashcombe Hall felt changed after the fire. Smoke still clung to the stone walls, a bitter memory of the night's terror. The staff moved quietly, repairing what they could, eyes flicking to the scorched stable as if afraid that another attack might erupt at any moment. For Leila, sleep came only in brief fits, haunted by the image of flames and the sound of Midnight's hooves on cobblestones. Yet under the fatigue, something new was stirring, a resolve sharper than fear, fed by anger and the need to reclaim control. Morning brought pale sunlight and the steady rhythm of restoration, but also a sense of urgency. Leila called a meeting in the hall's old drawing room, where thick curtains muted the world outside. Gareth arrived, face drawn but determined. Sarah set up her laptop, blueprints spread beside her, while Amari arranged folders of digital files and notes. Vicar Alice was last, her calm presence settling the group. There was a shift now, less waiting, more planning. Vicar Alice spoke first, her tone measured and direct. If Wynn and his friends want to fight with threats, we answer with law and evidence. We have allies, people who care about heritage, about fairness. Let's use every tool. She outlined a plan for making freedom of information, FOI, requests about council contracts, police equipment funding, and surveillance near Ashcombe Hall. She explained how to demand transparency, how to force those in power to answer uncomfortable questions. Amari, eyes bright with determination, began mapping out the stop and search incidents in the area. He dug into the public records, cross-referencing dates, times and locations, building a heat map that exposed a pattern. Mercer's officers, under the guise of routine, had disproportionately targeted Ashcombe's staff and visitors. Amari worked through lunch, lines of code flickering across his screen, each data point a tiny rebellion against intimidation. Leila watched, pride swelling despite the exhaustion. For the first time in days, she felt a measure of control returning. She took the FOI templates from Alice, drafting precise, pointed requests. She listed each surveillance camera, and the private firms operating in the area. The process was slow, bureaucratic, but each email sent was a small act of defiance. As the afternoon wore on, Gareth confessed his fear in a quiet moment by the window. He admitted he'd been tempted to give in, to sell the woodland Wynn coveted, to end the pressure and shame. Scandal could finish us, he said, his voice raw. The Pembroke name survived wars, recessions, but one more legal mess, and we're finished. Leila didn't reply with empty comfort. Instead, she reminded him of the hall's purpose, of its place in the community and the fight for something bigger than pride. She told him that real honor meant facing the threat, not running from it. Sarah interrupted with news. A council response to one of their FOI requests had arrived. Alice read aloud, a dry, bureaucratic letter, but hidden within was a revelation. The police had accepted equipment donations from Wynn's charitable foundation, supposedly for community safety. The memo attached confirmed what they feared: a partnership existed between the local force and Wynn's group, with joint oversight on security infrastructure. In other words, Mercer's authority and Wynn's resources were working together, cloaked as public service. The team worked late, building their case. Amari pulled up maps, tracing patterns of harassment and camera placement. Sarah compiled a timeline of every incident since restoration began. Leila drafted a summary report, cross-referencing legal statutes and preservation standards. Alice connected with local journalists and advocacy groups, discreetly raising awareness without tipping their hand. As dusk fell, the hall felt both vulnerable and fortified, a fortress under siege, but no longer passive. Leila moved from room to room, checking locks and cameras, feeling the weight of history in every timber. In the kitchen, she paused to stare at the digital map Amari had pinned to the corkboard, each colored mark a testament to their vigilance. The hall wasn't just a building anymore, it was a battleground. Later, as the others dispersed, Leila found herself alone and in the study. The firelight danced across old portraits, casting flickering shadows on faces both proud and weary. She realized how much she'd changed in just a few days, how the role of heritage architect had become something more, part detective, part advocate, part guardian. The fight had shifted from saving stone and glass to defending people, history, and truth. Gareth entered, holding 2 mugs of tea. He sat across from Leila, shoulders sagging, the exhaustion plain on his face. Yet his eyes held a new kind of gratitude, softer and deeper than pride. "You could have walked away," he said. "This isn't your fight, wasn't, at least. Thank you for staying." Leila shook her head. "Ashcombe belongs to everyone who cares about it. That means fighting for it. And for you." Their words hung in the air, a promise as binding as any contract. By midnight, a draft of their report was ready. Alice would deliver it to the local paper and to a barrister she trusted. Sarah double-checked the security system, adding a fresh lock to the cellar. Amari scheduled an automatic backup of all digital evidence to the cloud. Each small act felt like another stone in a wall, protection built, piece by piece, from solidarity and resolve. Before bed, Leila visited midnight, the horse's dark coat shining in the moonlight. She leaned against the paddock rail, breathing in the night air, letting fatigue ebb for a moment. Midnight snorted softly, nuzzling her hand. In the hush of the starlit yard, Leila found something like hope. They were no longer alone in the fight, and the hall was no longer defenseless. The night was still, but in the depths of Ashcombe Hall, the old stones seemed to vibrate with purpose. Leila slept deeply, dreams untroubled for the first time in days, knowing that tomorrow would bring another battle, but that together, they had found their footing. The war for Ashcombe's future was being waged on new ground, through data, law, and the determination not to be silenced. A silver-grey morning settled over Ashcombe Hall, the chill in the air heavy with unspoken threats. Leila moved through the halls, her mind still turning over the findings of the night before, the partnership between Wynn's charitable trust and the local police, the heat maps and logs of harassment, the realization that every inch of progress they made would be met with resistance. She barely slept, but exhaustion had become her companion, replaced each day by the quiet flame of determination. Today, however, was different. There was an invitation she couldn't refuse, a luncheon hosted by Sir Alistair Wynn himself at the estate's old shooting lodge on the edge of the grounds. It was meant to look like an olive branch, a genteel English ritual, linen tablecloths, fine bone china, silver cutlery that caught the pale light, and a long table spread under a tent on the broad green lawn. Yet everyone who'd lived through the past week knew what it really was, a stage for negotiation, an ambush disguised as hospitality. Gareth dressed the part of the landed gentleman, his suit pressed, his hair neatly combed, but he seemed almost brittle with tension as they walked down the path together. Leila, ever the professional, wore her work jacket and scarf, outwardly composed but inwardly wary. Amari followed with Sarah, carrying folders and a discreetly hidden recorder. Vicar Alice was already there when they arrived, her presence like a shield, her polite smile giving nothing away. Wynn greeted them with practiced warmth, his voice booming across the lawn, his handshake too firm. His grey suit fit perfectly, his eyes quick and calculating behind rimless glasses. He insisted they call him Alistair, spoke of tradition, of modernizing for the next generation. Yet under each platitude was the glint of a predator assessing his prey. At his side, D.I. Mercer lingered, his presence a reminder that power came in many uniforms. Lunch began with formal pleasantries, an elaborate display of hospitality, but the real conversation waited for the second course, when the servers melted away and Wynn leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to signal that the performance was over. He addressed Gareth first, outlining a proposal he called pragmatic. If the Pembrokes would agree to sell the eastern woodland, a parcel bordering the highway, Wynn's foundation would cover the hall's debts, fund the restoration, and sponsor a scholarship program for local youth. It sounded generous, even visionary, but the price was unmistakable. The woodland, the last unbroken tract of wild land for miles, would be cleared for strategic development. Logistics, warehouses, asphalt. Gareth looked as if he'd been punched. His jaw worked, words caught in his throat. He glanced at Leila, searching for a lifeline, for any excuse to reject the offer without condemning his family's name to ruin. Leila kept her tone measured, her posture straight, as she replied. She spoke about conservation regulations, about historic England's guidelines, about the duty of every heritage architect to protect both structure and landscape as an inseparable whole. She cited specific clauses, countering each of Wynn's community benefit talking points with legal precedent and preservation ethics. Each time, Wynn smiled a little tighter, his patience thinning. When he realized she wouldn't be coaxed or bullied, the mask slipped just a bit, and his next offer was delivered without pretense: "I can solve all your problems, Leila. Or I can make them much worse." It was a threat, barely veiled, as sharp as broken glass under velvet. Leila didn't flinch. Instead, she met his eyes and answered calmly, citing regulations, referencing oversight bodies, making it clear that she would document every interaction. Wynn's lips curled in a cold smile. The room felt colder for it. Mercer, sensing the shift, tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. He joked about village politics, dropped hints about recent unfortunate fires in the area, his gaze pointed. But in his attempt to intimidate, he let slip that Wynn's foundation had quietly funded not only the police equipment, but also legal challenges that had nearly ruined Gareth's career years earlier. The connection was clear now. Wynn's money had been the shadow behind every setback, every humiliation the Pembrokes had suffered. Sarah, who'd said little until now, broke her silence with a sharp observation about strings attached to every supposed act of generosity. She asked Wynn directly about the private security firm and the unregistered cameras at the estate gate. Wynn laughed it off, but the veneer of charm was cracked. Lunch ended awkwardly, with Wynn rising first, brushing invisible crumbs from his jacket. He offered one last considerate warning, that delays and scandals were not good for anyone, and that his patience had limits. His eyes lingered on Leila, making it clear that her refusal had made her the primary target. The group walked back to the hall in silence, the mood heavy, the sense of threat more palpable than ever. Gareth finally spoke, his voice small, defeated. "He'll ruin us. He always finds a way." Leila stopped, turning to face him beneath the old oak by the drive. "He wants you to believe that. But we're not alone, and we're not powerless." Her words were steady, but her mind was racing, already strategizing the next move. It was time to use every resource: history, law, technology, and the resilience of the people who called Ashcombe Hall home. That evening, as the sky darkened and the hall's lights glowed gold against the dusk, Leila gathered the team once more. She outlined the next steps: ramp up transparency, double down on documentation, involve more allies from the preservation and legal worlds. They were preparing for a siege, but this time, they were ready to fight on their own terms. Outside, midnight paced the paddock, silhouetted against the last light. Leila watched the horse, feeling the weight of the day settle in her chest. The enemy had shown his face, and the lines were drawn. The hall, the woodland, the history, all depended now on courage and cunning. She promised herself, whatever Wynn tried next, Ashcombe would not fall quietly. After Wynn's luncheon, a heavy sense of vulnerability hung over Ashcombe Hall. Every movement seemed watched, every phone call felt suspect, every small sound in the night made Leila's nerves tighten. The threat was not just outside, it seeped through the ancient stone, into the daily lives of everyone trying to save the estate. That night, Gareth's anxiety was almost physical. Sarah grew more clipped in her orders, and Amari began checking for bugs in the kitchen and library. Even midnight, pacing restless circles in his paddock, seemed to sense the strain. It was Sarah who suggested they move, at least for a night, out of the main house. She remembered the bothy, a squat stone shelter deep in the woods, once used by gamekeepers and shepherds. It was little more than a weathered cottage, walls thick with moss, windows shuttered and narrow, a cast-iron stove cold in the centre. But it offered seclusion, a place to regroup without the glare of Wynn's cameras or Mercer's prying eyes. The group packed quickly, blankets, flashlights, laptops, food, and, for Leila, a copy of the estate blueprints tucked safely under her arm. They left before dusk, Vicar Alice leading the way along a muddy trail as a cold wind rose behind them. The bothy was musty and dim, but safe. Alice lit candles and arranged them on the stone hearth, their flickering light throwing shadows that felt almost protective. Amari rigged a small solar charger for their phones and checked for cell service, quietly relieved when his tracker apps showed no unfamiliar devices nearby. Gareth carried in firewood, his face set in determined lines, doing whatever he could to keep his hands busy. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the wind whip through the trees outside, letting the stillness settle their nerves. It was Alice who finally spoke, her voice gentle and strong, inviting them to gather for a brief moment of prayer and reflection. "We're not just fighting for walls and wood," she said. "We're fighting for the meaning of this place, for honesty, for those who come after us. I don't care if you pray, or if you just breathe and listen. But remember, no darkness lasts forever. Not even this." The words settled over the group like a blessing, something steady and grounding. Later, with the candles burning low, Gareth surprised them all by breaking the silence. He confessed, voice trembling, that years earlier, when Wynn's foundation first began circling the estate, he accepted a donation with little scrutiny. The money had seemed like a lifeline for his family's crumbling finances, the fine print easy to ignore. But soon came requests for favors, pressure to sign off on development, and subtle threats. When Gareth had tried to resist, his legal career crumbled under the weight of a scandal he'd barely understood, his reputation ruined not by failure, but by association. "I closed my eyes to things I shouldn't have," he admitted, staring into the fire, his hands clenched in his lap. "I thought if I just did enough good, it would balance out the bad. But I was wrong." Wynn. He never forgets a favor, never forgives a slight. "I was scared, and I still am. I'm sorry." The words cracked something in the group, melting some of the tension. Even Sarah, usually so pragmatic, reached over to squeeze Gareth's hand. Leila listened in silence, feeling a swell of sympathy. She knew what it was to make compromises, to carry regrets. She set the blueprints aside and crossed to Midnight, who had been tethered just outside the bothy, his breath visible in the chilly air. She pressed her palm against the horse's warm flank, feeling his strength. "We all have our ghosts," she whispered. "But we get to choose what we do now." She looked back into the candlelight, meeting the eyes of everyone in the room. "This isn't just Gareth's fight, or mine. It's all of ours. And as long as we stick together, they can't break us." The fire burned low, but sleep didn't come easily. Amari sat by the window, peering into the darkness, earpiece in place, scanning frequencies for anything unusual. Sarah reviewed security camera logs from her phone, cursing softly at gaps in the footage. Leila mapped the possible escape routes and secret rooms again, memorizing the twists and turns of Ashcombe's old bones. Alice jotted down notes for a press release, her calm composure hiding the flicker of worry in her eyes. Near midnight, Amari startled everyone with a whispered announcement. He'd intercepted a radio call, Mercer, on an encrypted line, confirming to Wynn's security that the police had a warrant to search Ashcombe Hall the next evening. "They'll come tomorrow night," Amari said, voice taut. "They want to catch us off guard. But if we're ready, we can record everything, legally. Catch them in the act." The revelation sharpened everyone's focus. This was the opportunity they'd been waiting for, a chance to document not just intimidation, but collusion, and overreach. Plans formed quickly. Leila and Sarah would wire up hidden mics near the old well and priest hole, where private conversations so often took place. Alice would invite local journalists to a restoration fundraising gala, providing a cover for extra people on site. Amari would set up livestream backups and cloud storage, so even if equipment was seized, the evidence would survive. As dawn bled grey through the trees, the group left the bothy, their fear replaced by resolve. They returned to Ashcombe as a team, no longer simply defending but actively preparing a trap. In the stable, Leila paused to hug midnight, her promise echoing in her mind: she would protect the hall, no matter the cost. She looked back at Gareth, Sarah, Alice, and Amari, all changed by what they'd survived, all ready for the storm to come. The battle lines were set, the last secrets shared. Now it was time to fight, not just for Ashcombe's walls, but for its soul. The morning of the Ashcombe Hall fundraising gala arrived cold and bright, sunlight glinting off the windows, burning away the last mist from the lawns. For the first time in weeks, the estate bustled not with anxiety but with the purposeful energy of a community coming together. Tables appeared on the front steps, bunting fluttered above the grand entrance, and local vendors rolled in with crates of produce and fresh bread for the buffet. The smell of baking mingled with the scent of flowers, and for a fleeting moment, the threat that had haunted Ashcombe seemed distant, even unreal. But beneath the surface, the true work was just beginning. Leila and Sarah were up before dawn, moving quietly through the oldest parts of the hall. They reviewed every camera, every hidden microphone, every wire carefully run under carpets and through cracks in the ancient floorboards. In the library, the battered oak table was transformed into a nerve center, laptops linked to off-site servers, extra power banks ready, Wi-Fi boosted. Amari checked connections for the fourth time, his nerves wound tight, his eyes scanning lines of code and feed monitors as he tested each channel. By midday, guests began to arrive, neighbors, journalists, local dignitaries. Vicar Alice greeted them at the entrance, her calm professionalism masking the tension underneath. She mingled with ease, steering conversations toward heritage and the importance of transparency, making sure that the right people had a reason to linger near the heart of the house. Gareth appeared more polished than anyone had seen him in years, his suit pressed, his smile practiced but genuine. He stood tall, meeting each gaze with a steady confidence that belied the fear he still carried. Today, he would no longer hide. In the background, Leila moved like a conductor, checking the schedule, texting reminders, nodding encouragement to Sarah and Amari. She wore a tailored jacket and sturdy boots, blending the poise of a leader with the practicality of someone ready for anything. Only she and the inner circle knew what was truly at stake tonight. The first hours of the gala were a blur of speeches and handshakes, canapes and tours. Local reporters snapped photos, their attention focused on restoration plans, the story of community and heritage. But as dusk fell and the lights glowed golden in the hall's windows, the mood changed. Wynn arrived, flanked by Mercer, their presence turning the room colder, their smiles sharp and watchful. Wynn congratulated Leila with a perfunctory handshake, complimented Gareth's courage under pressure, and surveyed the room as if already deciding what he would keep once Ashcombe was his. Leila led the pair through the house, pointing out the freshly restored woodwork, the original Tudor windows, the stone hearths unearthed during the survey. Each stop was strategically chosen, near a hidden mic, under the subtle watch of a camera. The old well cover in the east parlor, now a discreet focal point, had a tiny recording device pressed into the wood, hidden beneath the edge of a Persian rug. Downstairs, Sarah monitored the feeds from her laptop, watching as Wynn and Mercer paused at the old well, their voices carrying just loud enough for the mic to catch. "It's a beautiful space, Gareth," Wynn said, his tone honeyed. "I'd hate for it to go to waste, or fall into the wrong hands." Mercer, glancing toward the doorway to check for eavesdroppers, leaned in closer. "You know the deal. Sell the woodland, and your troubles disappear. Otherwise, tonight could be inconvenient." The threat was thinly veiled. Wynn went further, dropping the mask entirely. "We have friends in the council, in the press. The right story could bury you, Leila. You can still do the smart thing." But Leila didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back and gestured for Gareth to speak, trusting him to own the moment. Gareth straightened, meeting Wynn's gaze head-on. For the first time, he spoke not as a nervous heir but as a man reclaiming his family's legacy. He apologized publicly, loud enough for the guests nearby to hear, for past mistakes, for the ambiguity that had clouded Ashcombe's finances, for not standing up sooner. He thanked Leila for her integrity and the community for holding him to account. In that instant, the hall was not just his burden, but everyone's hope. The gala built to a quiet climax as Alice called for attention, raising her glass to the future of Ashcombe Hall. Behind her words, Amari triggered the livestream, sending real-time feeds of the parlour's conversation to secure servers and, quietly, to 2 local journalists standing in the crowd. Sarah signaled when the backup was confirmed, video, audio, metadata all safely uploaded. Suddenly, Mercer cornered Leila near the study, voice low and tight. He handed her a thick envelope, a bribe, unmistakable. "You want this to go away, you play along," he said, tone oily. "Otherwise, obstruction charges are easy to arrange." Leila took the envelope, keeping her face neutral as the camera above captured the moment. "You know you're being recorded, right?" she said quietly, meeting Mercer's eyes with steely calm. Mercer's expression flickered, anger flashing beneath the surface. "You're making a mistake," he growled. "Maybe," Leila replied, "but not tonight." Downstairs, Wynn was overheard boasting to a councilman about his arrangement with law enforcement, equipment for data, a fair trade. He laughed, not knowing his words were being recorded. As the night wound down, Sarah gave the signal, all files were secure, all evidence double-backed up. Gareth made one final, public plea for anyone with concerns about the estate's future to step forward, not to gossip, but to be part of the solution. The crowd applauded, moved by his sincerity, and for the first time, Leila saw real hope sparking in the room. When the last guest departed and the hall fell quiet again, the team gathered in the study, exhausted but triumphant. Amari confirmed every recording was safe, every file accounted for. Sarah poured glasses of cider, and Alice led a quiet toast, not just for survival, but for courage and for the truth. Outside, a thin rain began to fall, blurring the lights on the lawn. Leila slipped out to the paddock, resting her hand on Midnight's neck, breathing in the cool air. She felt something shift, not relief, exactly, but a lifting of dread, the knowledge that they'd fought back and held their ground. Inside, Gareth slumped in a chair, Sarah and Amari grinning in the soft lamplight. The battle was not over, but tonight, Ashcombe Hall belonged to its people, and its secrets had finally begun to work in their favour. Dawn broke cold and clear over Ashcombe Hall, light catching in the droplets of rain still clinging to every branch and blade of grass. The air was full of that peculiar quiet after a storm, a sense that something fundamental had changed, even if not everyone knew it yet. Leila woke early, the events of the night before replaying in her mind, Mercer's threats, Wynn's boasts, Gareth's public reckoning. The files were safe, the evidence airtight, but victory still felt precarious, as if any moment another blow could fall. She moved through the house in a daze, checking the old servers in the library, making sure Amari's backups had synced. Sarah was already in the kitchen, her voice low as she reviewed a checklist, security cameras, locks, contact numbers for the legal team. Gareth, sleepless and raw, sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. For a while, the only sounds were the ticking of the clock and midnight's distant hoofs thudding in the paddock, steady as a heartbeat. By mid-morning Vicar Alice appeared, a slim folder tucked under her arm and a look of purposeful calm on her face. "It's time," she said simply. "We're not alone in this anymore." With a nod, she made her way to the front door, where two dark sedans had just pulled up. The National Crime Agency had arrived. The lead NCA agent was brisk, professional, and unhurried, nothing like Mercer's swagger or Wynn's oily charm. She introduced herself, flashed her badge, and entered with a small team. Leila handed over the drives and transcripts, Amari provided passwords and explained the technical details, while Sarah produced a log of every strange occurrence and every instance of intimidation. The evidence was overwhelming: audio, video, emails, council memos, bank records, bribes. Alice offered her own statement, clear and firm, reinforcing every point with the moral authority only a community leader could wield. As the NCA agents fanned out through the house and grounds, Mercer arrived, summoned but looking as if he'd expected a very different day. He tried to maintain composure, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. The lead agent met him at the entrance, reading the warrant with quiet finality. Mercer made a last attempt at defiance, raised his voice, claimed he was being set up, but no one listened. The agents moved with silent coordination, searching his car, reviewing his devices, boxing up files. In the kitchen, Gareth watched as Mercer's wrists were cuffed, the click of the handcuffs echoing across the flagstones. The moment was surreal. Gareth sank into a chair, face buried in his hands, overcome by a wave of relief so powerful it left him dizzy. Leila hovered at his side, not speaking, but offering the comfort of quiet presence. After everything, the threats, the fires, the endless nights of dread, the fight was no longer theirs alone. Now the system itself was moving, slow but inevitable. Outside, Wynn's car arrived. He stepped out, not with his usual swagger, but with careful calculation, eyes darting across the assembled crowd of agents, villagers, and local journalists who had caught wind of the story. His smile was gone. The NCA agent met him, voice low but implacable, summoning him for questioning and advising him of his rights. Wynn looked at Leila and Gareth one last time, and for the first time, something like uncertainty flickered across his face. The tension in the air felt electric, as if everyone were waiting for the world to shift. Alice moved through the house, offering reassurance to staff, answering reporters' questions, making sure the real story was told, one of resilience, transparency, and the community's refusal to be cowed. Amari coordinated with the legal aid lawyers who had rushed up from Leeds, helping the hall's staff give statements and document every detail. Leila took a quiet moment outside, walking the perimeter of the estate, feeling the sun warm on her skin. She stopped by the paddock, pressing her forehead to Midnight's neck, whispering gratitude into the horse's mane. For the first time since she'd arrived, the land felt truly alive, as if it were breathing easier now that the threats had been dragged into the open. The morning blurred into afternoon, the house a hive of quiet, determined activity. Midway through the day, an unexpected figure arrived, Eleanor Vane, the former legal secretary, whose notebooks had long been a whispered legend among Ashcombe's staff. She was smaller than Leila expected, but her eyes were bright with intelligence, her hands steady as she set down a battered leather ledger on the table. "This belonged to your father," Eleanor said, addressing Gareth, her voice carrying the authority of memory and old loyalty. "But the truth in here is bigger than any one family." She opened the ledger, revealing decades of notes, dates, names, payments, all the subtle exchanges that underpinned the region's shadowy power structure. Wynn's name appeared more than once, alongside council members, bankers, even law enforcement. Leila felt the air change again. This was the missing piece, the final connection that expanded the investigation beyond Ashcombe Hall. She watched as the NCA agents photographed the ledger, paging through the past as if every scribbled line was a detonator. By the end of the day, the hall was still standing, but its future was finally its own. The NCA loaded boxes of evidence into their cars and promised regular updates. Mercer, silent now, was driven away, no longer in control. Wynn, called in for questioning, faced a wider investigation stretching far beyond his schemes at Ashcombe. In the quiet that followed, Gareth sat in the library, the late sun painting gold across the books. He looked emptied out, but lighter, freed from the weight of secrets and fear. Leila joined him, the silence between them full of meaning. She rested a hand on his arm, both of them watching as midnight grazed peacefully beyond the window. For the first time, Leila believed they had truly saved Ashcombe, not just the building, but the idea of it, the promise of something preserved not out of fear, but out of hope. The hall would open to the community, the ledger would spark a reckoning, and the darkness that had long haunted these old stones would not return easily. But even as the shadows lengthened, Leila knew vigilance was required. The system would not fix itself overnight. The work of restoration was never truly finished, but, for now, Ashcombe Hall was safe, its secrets laid bare, its future finally within reach. A full year had passed since the day the NCA arrived at Ashcombe Hall. Seasons had turned, washing the estate in green and gold, and then, finally, in the soft grey light of another spring. Where once there had been tension in every shadow, now there was laughter and purpose. The old house breathed easier, its wounds healing, its walls warmed by more than just sunlight. In the fresh air of an April morning, the estate was alive, staff hurrying across the gravel paths, students arriving with notebooks and toolkits, the voices of visitors echoing through the halls. The hall, once guarded by secrets, now stood open. Leila Okafor, hair tied back and jacket dusted with sawdust from the workshop, stood on the east terrace, watching the crowd gather at the gates. Today was the official reopening of Ashcombe Hall, not as a private residence, but as a charitable trust. For months, she and the team had worked with local partners to reimagine the estate as a centre for heritage education. Apprenticeship programs, skills workshops, and community history projects filled the calendar, drawing in not just experts, but neighbours, schoolchildren, and retirees. The hall's story, once a shield for the powerful, now belonged to everyone. Gareth Pembroke moved through the crowd, a familiar but changed figure. He no longer carried himself with the brittle pride of a man haunted by failure. Instead, he greeted volunteers by name, laughed with guests, and kept one hand resting on the shoulder of a young apprentice as they crossed the grounds together. Gareth had stepped away from law, pouring his time into managing the hall's new scholarship fund and guiding the trust's board. He had found peace in service, letting go of the old burdens, building something enduring in their place. Sarah coordinated the last-minute details, walkie-talkie clipped to her belt, her voice brisk as she directed the catering staff and wrangled the local press. She had become more than the estate manager, she was the glue holding the new Ashcombe together, a leader as respected as any Pembroke. Even Amari, now finishing his university degree, was never far from the action. His technical skills had built the hall's digital archives, set up live streams for classes, and created new opportunities for young people across Yorkshire. He moved through the event with quiet pride, watching as visitors explored the rooms he'd helped secure and restore. Vicar Alice arrived in her usual sensible shoes and raincoat, carrying the ribbon and ceremonial scissors. She stopped to shake hands with Leila and Gareth, offering a smile that carried all the warmth of the community behind her. She would lead the opening ceremony, her words a reminder of how faith and courage, sometimes in small, ordinary acts, could change the course of lives. At the heart of it all was Midnight, the old racehorse, his coat now dusted with grey, but his eyes bright. He wore a wreath of wildflowers around his neck, a local tradition for the estate's guardians. When the moment came, Gareth led him slowly down the main drive, the sound of his hooves echoing across the gravel as the crowd fell silent. Leila waited by the ribbon, her heart full as she took the scissors from Alice's hands. The cameras flashed, reporters jostled for space, and with a gentle nod from Gareth, Leila cut the ribbon. Ashcombe Hall was open. Applause rose, a wave of joy and relief that seemed to vibrate through the old stones. Children darted forward, eager to explore the stables and gardens. Workshops began in the old library, wood carving, brickwork, lectures on Tudor history. In the kitchens, local women prepared trays of scones and tea, while Amari gave a tour of the new digital archive, explaining how technology could keep the past alive without erasing its mystery. Throughout the day, Gareth and Leila found quiet moments together. In the hall's old study, Gareth unlocked a narrow cabinet and handed Leila a heavy iron key, the one that had opened the Pembroke family's private library for generations. "It belongs to you now," he said quietly. "You gave Ashcombe its future." Leila accepted it, overwhelmed by the trust and the history the gesture represented. As sunlight filtered through the wisteria climbing the west wall, Sarah called the team together for a quick lunch in the staff kitchen. Laughter filled the room, the camaraderie of a family built not by blood, but by battle and shared purpose. Leila caught sight of Eleanor Vane, the former legal secretary, now a regular visitor to the hall. Eleanor sat at the corner table, still sharp, her battered notebook always close at hand. She had become the living archive of the estate's shadowy past, sharing lessons with each new apprentice, helping to ensure the old mistakes would not be repeated. Late in the afternoon, the NCA sent an update. The investigation launched by Eleanor's ledger had expanded, tracing Wynn's web of influence across Yorkshire and beyond. Charges were pending for multiple officials, and Wynn himself faced trial. The system, slow but relentless, was still grinding forward. The hall's team celebrated the news, but no one mistook it for the end of vigilance. The world was full of new threats, and corruption did not vanish simply because one network had been exposed. That evening, as dusk fell and the crowd drifted away, Leila wandered out to the paddock where midnight grazed quietly. She leaned against the fence, watching the sky turn lavender above the hills. Gareth joined her, both of them silent, letting the peace of the evening settle. In the hush, they heard the distant sound of voices from the village, children's laughter floating on the air, the hall's doors, still open, light pouring into the twilight. Leila smiled, the exhaustion and triumph of the past year swirling inside her. She knew the work would never truly be done. But as she looked at Ashcombe Hall, at the windows shining, the gardens blooming, the people within, she felt certain that the fight had been worth every scar. Together, they had broken the cycle of secrets and fear. They had turned the hall outward, making it a beacon rather than a fortress. And as the stars blinked on above the estate, Leila offered a silent promise, to herself, to midnight, to every future steward of Ashcombe, that she would never stop listening to the lessons of the past, never stop fighting for the truth, and never let the darkness slip back in unnoticed. The hall would stand, open and alive, as long as there were people brave enough to guard it, not just with locks and laws, but with memory, with kindness, and with courage that outlasted any storm.